It's a very nice thing to have a chance to talk to Sophie Wilson again. Sophie, when and where were you born?
I was born in Leeds in North Yorkshire in 1957, which is epochs ago.
Well, it's an anniversary, isn't it? What, it's 60?
I will be 60, yes.
Gosh, congratulations. Sophie, tell me something. People sometimes are quite close to their grandparents, and certainly influenced by their parents. Tell me something about your family.
Well, yeah. So, mother's grandparents, my mother's mother lived down the road, so we could see her when we wanted. When I had things like shocking asthma attack at school, and both parents were at work, then Gran could be summoned. In fact, her house was closest to the bus stop, so you could drop in there before going home if you wanted to, or if there were critical family illnesses and you had to be quarantined off, then you'd go and stay with Gran for a while. And so I had German measles with her. One of my sisters had measles with her. So.
What did she or her husband do? What were their occupations?
Well, for all my life, Gran was retired. She was a magistrate, she was a companion, she took French at university, being the first one of the family to go to university at all, and she did travel a lot. I had a globe-trotting granny. My parents were both teachers. So Mum taught physics, Dad taught English.
At what level were the teachers?
School teachers. Dad at a college of further education, Mum at a girls' school.
Tell me something about their character.
No. What to notice about them? They're quite independent of thought.
You talk in the present tense, they're both alive, are they?
Yes. Of the people I've talked about so far, my grandmother died at 96, but my parents both are still alive and they're on holiday at the moment.
They won't be able to see this for a while anyway then.
I don't know. I mean, make things electronically available, people can see them everywhere. Dad is travelling with a plethora of stuff. I think Mum's only taken an iPad.
So what were their characters insofar as they influenced you, do you think? Encouraging?
Well, self-sufficient, work out how to do it if you're going to do it. And one of the ways, I said that 1957 was an epoch ago, one of the ways things have really, really, really changed is that I lived in a world built by people I knew. The house was furnished with stuff my parents had made, Dad building the furniture, Mum the soft furnishings. When we were young, Dad built a car, he built boats. For my mum's physics lab at her school, we, the family, jointly built all the equipment. And that's inconceivable nowadays. Nothing is made by people you know.
You were born in an epochal year of the beginning of the rock and pop scene, as you know.
Well, we weren't brought up with it. Dad was a violinist, had been in orchestras. Music in the house was mostly Baroque, by which I mean from the Baroque age, not not eclectic. It was only when we individually got our own personal radios or whatever as we were growing up that we could listen to anything else. We didn't have a television in the house till the moon landings, which we saw on a tiny black and white Sony Trinitron portable telly, having been invited downstairs by Mum to watch the critical moments, but of course it was all too late for children to do.
Yeah.
So, I mean, again, that's different. As a result, all the children, and indeed parents, read voraciously. We'd go to library and each get out our maximum allocation of books, which I think was 4 books each. So that would be 12 children's books and 8 adult books, and we'd take them all back next week.
And read them on the way.
having read them all, yes. I mean, each person had read all of the books.
Do you remember what your favourites were in your early childhood?
Not in my early childhood. I remember reading all the Shelley School stories, one after another. What else did we like? Oh, we birthday presents. We would each get an Arthur Ransom book.
I was going to ask about Arthur Ransom.
So there was an awful lot of Swallows and Amazons, all the way up to We didn't mean to go to see.
Yep.
Which I understand they've now made into a film, which is a bit strange. I'm not sure I want to go and see. Loved books that have been made into films rarely work for us.
Yeah.
Dad had quite eclectic tastes. If we were very good, we could read some of his books. So he had things like T.H. White, Tolkien, as well as an awful lot of English literature.
C.S. Lewis.
He wasn't into Lewis. I think the religion, although Dad was a lay preacher, Lewis's religion did put him off a bit. I did go on to read all the Lewises, including things like Pelandra and Out of the Silent Planet rather than Narnia. Narnia was something only the children read, not something that Mum and Dad had ever read.
What was your earliest concrete memory?
I'm not sure that I have one anymore. I'm very aware of stuff that's a real memory versus stuff that's a memory of a memory. And for childhood, things are now only memories of memories of memories now. I don't have any feeling that I was actually there for an event that I know happened. Like, for example, I had my thumb squashed in the hinge of a telephone box. I know it happened. I have absolutely no memory of it at all. I know where I went to school. I have absolutely no memory of it at all. I know that there was a flood and that we walked to school in Wellingtons for a while. No memory of that at all, and so on. Yeah. So the difference between things I know happened and things that I can actually remember is fairly stark. I'm not even sure that teenage memories have any first-person quality to them anymore. They're more memories of memories.
What was, when you were sort of 6, 7, 8, did you have any particular interests, hobbies apart from reading?
No.
Do you collect things or?
Well, Gran used to send back postcards from interesting places, so there was a stamp collection, but it wasn't very good because it was basically the places that Gran had visited. We had Lego, we had Meccano.
Were you keen on that?
Oh, I did jigsaws. There were a lot of jigsaws. And unfortunately I had all my jigsaws out and assembled when Mum did the chip pan fire and affected the house a lot. On the plus side, I got to help fill in an insurance claim for my jigsaws, buy some new ones. On the minus side, they were all covered with sooty gunk and they all had to be thrown away. Lots of books, huge numbers of books.
Well, I remember we talked last time about your short-sightedness. Remind me how short-sighted you were as a child and are now.
So as the children, as you go down the children, from eldest to youngest, we get progressively more and more short-sighted.
Which were you, the eldest? Or?
So I'm the eldest, and the youngest sister is really badly short-sighted. I was just about good enough to get away without glasses for quite a while. So my left eye is much less short-sighted than my right eye, which is quite profoundly short-sighted.
About what diopter?
So my right eye is -5, my left used to be about -2, it's heading towards -3 now. I have a lot of astigmatism as well. But basically, if you sat at the front of the class, you didn't have much trouble reading the board and so on. So I wasn't even aware that I needed glasses until a conversation with my mum. And again, this isn't a first-person memory anymore. This is just a memory of a memory of a memory, where we were going down the street and Mum said, "We'll stop at such and such a shop." And I said, "Where is it?" And she said, "It's over there, you can see the sign." And I said, "What sign?" So off we were hauled to the opticians, and glasses ever since.
Well, how old were you then?
God knows. I was probably quite old for somebody not knowing they needed glasses. So that would make it something like 11, 12, that sort of age. So yeah, quite old.
What was your first school?
Not
school.
What
Not a kindergarten, but an actual school.
I think it would be Panel Primary School. But I'm not sure. There might have been a thing that was sort of better than a kindergarten, and worse than a primary school. Since I think there was a Grosvenor House school before that, and hands up. I don't know the details of that. Memories of pre-5 years old aren't good.
No.
Even memories of memories of memories of memories of.
So you went at about 6 or 5 or 6 to your first school.
Yeah.
You mentioned, I think last time, that you suffered not only from eye problems, but also quite a lot of health problems like asthma and hay fever. Did they start early or later?
I suffered from asthma since I was 2, and bronchial asthma effects all the way, particularly in childhood. Nowadays they're brought under much better control, mostly by changes in lifestyle. But they were terrible. The 3rd year at grammar school, I lost a whole term to a bad bronchial asthma attack. After that, I didn't get taken to see my father's parents anymore because they lived in Nottingham, Mansfield, and the area was thick with coal dust at the time. It's much nicer now, but then that was sufficient to mean a whole term off school. As a result, I don't know anything about the mechanics of engines, the physics of engines.
Yeah. What did you do 11 plus and go to a grammar school or what?
Yes, I did 11 plus, for which I just scraped through. I was apparently on the borderline, and of course that's strange. Unlike today, people weren't aware of what was going to happen. So just one day I was taken to a strange place, a school I'd never been to on the other side of town, and
no practice.
Did the 11 plus exam. No practice, nothing.
And you got into what school?
I got into a grammar school, a very good grammar school.
Was it a good school?
Probably. Having parents who are teachers tends to expose flaws in schools teaching. I think it was a very well done school. I'm not exactly academically gifted. The streaming in the school wasn't great for me in any way. I ended up in a an A3 stream. Which is sort of the wrong place. It meant I could coast for a lot of subjects for a lot of the time.
You say you weren't academically gifted, but you read, at least for a year, mathematics at Cambridge. You were obviously very good at mathematics. Tell me about the mathematics in your family, because
well, obviously with a mother who's an expert in physics and a father who's an expert in English, all the kids went on to be mathematically inclined. Must be something in the genes.
When did you start being gifted at mathematics?
I wasn't. I think that's the clearest, and it's very clear that my intelligence generally is different from, qualitatively worse than, whatever, but I have a better memory. I have a near photographic memory. I remember things that are near photographs.
You've always had a photographic memory. When you read a page of your Tolkien, do you remember it?
Not in detail. It's near photographic.
Yeah.
Not photographic. So you get the gist. But memory is a big advantage in doing exams. And with memory and a little logic, you can get through most exams quite well. And so it isn't until exams get difficult and are more than just regurgitating the facts that you've already been told that one's lack of ability becomes obvious, which for me happened in the second year at Cambridge.
Yeah.
Probably my ability with maths was nothing more than remembering an awful lot.
Must be a little more, I suspect. But did the school notice you were good at mathematics quite early and put you in mathematics stream? What did you do?
Well, it was so it was a grammar school with streams, but the streams were based on the overall sort of level. So I wasn't in A1 or A2, I was in A3. A1 and A2 got extra subjects, Latin, things like that.
You must have done Latin if you went to Cambridge.
Absolutely not.
You couldn't get in.
Okay, I did.
You did. I must have been abolished about that time, but before you had to do it anyway. So you did maths, higher maths?
So I was sort of okay at most subjects. I mean, O levels, you could just do them. Particularly the maths exam, which little more than regurgitating facts. The teacher was aware of this, and we were banned from leaving the room in a 3-hour exam before 2 hours were up. And I think I did the paper in a little over an hour. So I spent the next hour memorising digits of pi, and precisely at the 2-hour mark, half the class stood up and walked out. That's sort of how easy the O-level maths exam is for people who can do O-level maths. I never liked chemistry. So although I was expected to go off to school and choose maths, physics, chemistry for A-levels, I ended up choosing maths, further maths and physics. And also doing the S-level papers for those as well. And that wasn't too bad. And then I took the Cambridge entrance exams with a lot of coaching from a Cambridge maths graduate who was my teacher at the time, and did get in.
Well, was he a good teacher, or were there any particular good teachers you remember in that school?
The maths teacher, being a Cambridge graduate, was probably the best all-round combination of being a good teacher and having command of your subject. There are other teachers who either had command of their subject or were good teachers, but rarely both. And mostly they concentrated on the A1, A2 stream, and I didn't get taught by them.
You mentioned your father was a lay preacher, and often at about 13 or 14, 15, one becomes confirmed if one's an Anglican. Were you confirmed?
No.
No.
I don't think there was a great deal of belief in the household, and we weren't brought up with any great emphasis on beliefs. And Dad, I can't remember when he stopped being it, so we'll lead the date. He stopped doing lay preaching, joined a country dance band as the violinist, and did English country dancing, so we got dragged off to those.
Sounds mildly preferable. But was religion ever important for you at all?
No.
No. And now you don't believe in...
I don't think I ever did.
So you classify yourself an atheist? Or agnostic? Or...
Somewhere between the two. But without being uppity about it in any way.
I mean, close to religion for some people is music. Have you been interested in music? You said you had heard a lot of Baroque music.
So yes, heard a lot of Baroque music, much of which remains with me. Dad, a violinist, tried to get us to learn the violin, which was probably torture for him. He has perfect pitch, and I don't think any of the children do. Liz stuck it out the longest, youngest sister stuck it out the longest, but we all gave up. And there's no playing, generating our own music anymore, apart from him.
Do you listen to a lot of music now? Go to concerts?
I used to. I got tinnitus starting in the 90s, and that's gnawed away at my appreciation for music, particularly classical music. When the dynamics aren't right and the sound isn't right, and there's additional screeching that has nothing to do with the chorus. Yes. I still like listening to a lot of music, but more and more it's just spoken word things.
What about sport? Are you ever sporty? Not at all.
Not at all.
You weren't forced to play lacrosse or hockey or anything?
No, there was nothing. I mean, having to participate in organised games at school came to a sad end when they sent me out. I think it would be the first day at grammar school. They sent us out for a cross-country run, and of course I had a massive asthma attack, and the games teacher had to find my grandmother and get me taken home and all that sort of thing after that. There was excused organising activities. Walk around the playing fields in good weather.
I was lucky.
Well, I'm not sure lucky. I mean, it might have been better to have more organised exercise, but I didn't.
Do you walk now?
I walk now. I have walked most of my life.
You like walking?
Yes.
And do you think when you're walking? I mean, do you try and solve problems you're working on when you're walking?
Well, walking's good because there's something to do and it takes your mind off the problem. I have this theory that you need to solve a problem. You need to assemble everything into your head so that you know what you're trying to do, and then you need to let the machinery crank. If you want new novel solutions to problems that haven't been done before, then it requires a bit more of being defocused. You've got the thing in your head, and you start examining it, and you thought there was a single solution, and it turns out there's a big forest of solutions, and you need to select something somehow. And walking's a good way of doing something while that process goes on, without spending sleepless nights thinking about it. And the other sort of thing is when you're already doing something and there's a tiny detail yet to be worked out. Walking's not as good for that. Sleepless nights are good at that one.
I was going to say, what other activities? I mean, some people drink, which kind of relaxes the mind. Other people do sports, and other people put the problem into their mind at night. They don't have a sleepless night, but in the morning they have solved it.
Well, that's the first type of problem. All those are the things that require being a bit defocused. The second type of problem, where you just need to work out some final nickety-pickety detail, that's when the sleepless night really helps, because you can run through the whole thing in your head, mounds of machine code running through your head. When BBC Basic was about to go off to ROM, I'd spend lots of nights with all the code running through my head, seeing what it did in my head and where the problems were. So there were two different types of thinking going on there. I can't believe drink helps with doing good coding.
Well, as you know, many computer programmers with whom I worked spent their evenings in the bar of the Eagle chatting to each other and trying out ideas, but maybe it was
that's the first time again. I mean, I had a bad experience with alcohol very young, and haven't touched a drop since.
Interesting. So let's go to Cambridge. You went to Selwyn?
Selwyn College.
Yeah. Did you enjoy it?
It was a really bad time. The first year wasn't too bad, and I got a third, and I didn't really know what a third meant. It was obvious that Selwyn wasn't a brilliant college to be at. There were only 6 mathematicians there. It's a bit isolated from the centre of Cambridge, which is sort of nice because I liked walking to and from lectures, walk through King's College or something like that. But backgrounds, what people are interested in, when you've only got 6 people, the chances of having a good overlap are quite slim.
Did you feel isolated as from a northern grammar school background?
Yeah, very.
You did?
Oh yes.
It was certainly the case when I was at Oxford in the 60s, but this is 20 years later. 15 years later.
Yeah, so no, it was very much still there. Then the second year was much more miserable, because by then it was obvious that I didn't know much about maths and couldn't do a lot of it, even with quite a lot of help, very kindly from other members of the 6 Selwyn mathematicians. And at the end of that year I failed the maths course, which was pretty bad. So that yes, the second year was really poor.
So summer, you are told that you failed, and probably July. What happens then?
You have to go and see the senior tutor to work out what's to become of you, which is a little bit nerve-wracking.
Yes.
And so you've been through 2 years. You failed quite badly, as I understand it. So I didn't even do some level of good. So what's to become of you? And he basically cast around for things I could do, and I could do some things. All of this stuff that we built for Mum's school, physics lab, oscilloscopes and things. So I could make things. and perhaps fortuitously computers were beginning to get a bit more recognition, and most importantly of all, there was a 1-year course. There weren't that many subjects that had 1-year courses, so I got signed up for the computing 1-year course.
Was it a diploma or a master? No, it wasn't master, so it was a certificate, or it was just counted towards your final degree?
It was just, yes, it was a 1-year course counted towards my final degree, with enough weight that if I passed it, I'd actually get a degree of some degree of merit rather than nothing.
Yeah.
I ended up with a 2-2.
What year was this?
I think it was probably 78. You'd have to look it up.
It's about that, 70. You're 15 years younger than me, so it's about 76, 78. So you went off to do the 1-year course. Who was in charge of the course?
Nobody.
Who was there then?
The 1-year course, there were loads of lecturers in loads of different subjects. You take a large enough basket of things and pass them well enough. So several things happened. Obviously, first thing was having not many students doing computer science, like it was me, didn't have any director of studies support, so they found an external guy to take over tuition and review my progress. So there was very little support capable from the college.
Who was that? Who did your audit?
It was a guy called Paul Bond.
Was he good? Helpful? All right.
Well, mostly he was very tolerant.
Yeah.
Because all of this is running alongside the other thing that happened.
Yeah.
Which is the founding of Acorn, which occurred before my final year. I first made the prototype for the Acorn System 1 during that summer when we were in discussions about whatever might be my future. So mostly Paul was very tolerant of the fact that if the thing, if the work set said using any computer, by which they usually meant using any computer in the computer laboratory, but since they only wrote using any computer, I would go and use an Acorn computer. So he would get things in computers that he barely understood, as it were.
Tell me, I mean, how did you get involved with Acorn? Was it through Herman Hauser or what?
It was Herman. Herman came and found me.
He was looking for you.
He was looking for me. He wasn't looking specifically for me. He was looking for somebody who knew about low power electronics, which it happened I did. So we have to go back to my age.
Yeah.
So as a June birth, and I was quite young at school generally. In primary school and secondary school, the date you're born really does determine a lot of your capabilities, because those people born in September are effectively nearly a year older than those people born June, July, August. And fortunately for the world, there are very few people born in June, July, August compared with the September, October, leading up to the big peak of people born in February, when there are lots born, and so on. But anyway, the younger ones have a lot of trouble just by being less old, less developed. So at the end of secondary school, I was still quite young. If I'd gone to university, I would have been really very young at university. However, taking the entrance exams for Cambridge meant that I had a whole term of being coached in passing the entrance exams. Took the entrance exams, that would be something like September, October, and then had nothing to do, as it were, and so I was encouraged, i.e. pushed out of the house, to go and get a job. And I got a job with ICI Fibres Research in Harrogate, without having any idea of what I was going to be doing there. And ICI Fibres had put me in this sort of small electronics researchy place. Well, it wasn't really researchy, it was just an odd group of technicians building things. So well, that was okay, because we were all good at building things, because we'd had extensive experience of building all these machines for Mum's physics lab. So I built them a few things, just following the circuit diagrams that I was given, assembled them. I got told off by the union rep that I was building them too quickly, and that sort of got me a little bit noticed. And so when it came to building things that hadn't been fully designed yet, they began to ask my opinion for things. So I started helping them design things, which is only a small extension from building them in the first place, really. It's things that are incompletely designed, it's like building something with a few missing bits that you can fill in. So that was fine too. And then they started wanting more complex things, and I started reading up on the subject. I got the RCA CMOS data book. I must have got it somewhere in 1974 and 1975, but it was the RCA CMOS data book 1972, for knowing about logic parts and so on. And that was good, because I could introduce them to new families of logic. They were using logic called RTL, which is different to today's RTL, different resistor transistor logic. And TTL had problems on factory floors because its operating voltage was too low. And so the noise in the electrical supplies in the factory made it very unreliable. So they didn't want to use TTL. But here was this new stuff, CMOS, which had very high noise immunity. Parts at the beginning were operating off 15 volts, and CMOS requires about a third of a rail. So it essentially had 5 volts noise immunity, where the TTL circuits were operating off 5 volts and required about 0.6 of a volt to switch, and hence had almost no noise immunity at all. 0.6 volts on the ground rail, very susceptible to noise. So I introduced them to all this stuff, and I built them some circuits, and that was great. I joined the Cambridge University Microprocessor Society.
When you went up to Cambridge?
No, it wasn't. It didn't exist. It was only formed, and I joined it towards the end of my second year at university.
Yeah.
And I wrote some articles for that, which, not surprisingly, were about CMOS logic, because it was what I knew.
Yeah.
And thus, when Herman was looking for somebody to build him what he called an electronic pocketbook, what we nowadays think of as the organiser function of a PDA or a Google Calendar on your smartphone, he knew he wanted something that lived in his pocket and was low power and ran off batteries. So he looked for somebody who knew about low power logic. And people pointed their fingers in my direction. Possibly a mistake.
Doesn't sound like it.
So Herman came and found me, and he wanted me to build him this electronic pocketbook. Well, that was sort of okay, because I'd been designing things anyway. So I had my folder of designs where there were my own circuits. So I said, yes, sure, I'll design that. And I'd go and visit him occasionally to keep him updated on progress.
Where was he located then?
Herman was located in 6 Kings Parade, So that's not very far away from the maths, so easy to drop in. He'd set up a design consultancy called Cambridge Process Unit, which is Herman's idea of a profound joke. And they had won a contract from Ace Coin Equipment in Wales, who manufactured electronic gaming machines, fruit machines, and they wanted to replace the existing controller, which was all electromechanical, with a fully digital electronic one. So Herman had found other people to do that. I wasn't involved in doing this the first time round, and they'd built a dual processor national semiconductor SCMP powered device to run the first fruit machine. And it was going to be subjected to some tests for rejecting the interference caused by piezoelectronic lighters, and obviously being built of NMOS circuitry, which the national semiconductor device is, it was actually quite susceptible in much the same way that TTL is. In fact, I think it had lots of TTL in it as well. So it obviously needed some big patch on the outside, so they brought me in for no reason that I can think of, as somebody who could design something to fix it. And what I did was to design a very wide spectrum radio receiver that would notice that there was all this electromagnetic interference coming and essentially press the reset button quickly. And I did that out of the bits and pieces that were in their back room, which they liked. Anyway, Herman wanted progress on the pocketbook, so I was showing him circuit diagrams one day, and I'd taken my whole sheaf of designs with me, and he wanted to know what the other circuits were. And so in there were all my other designs, and one of those other designs was a personal computer like the recently launched Science of Cambridge MK14, which was National Semiconductor SCMP powered, and there was a lot of commonality between Herman's people and Chris's people because they were living together, essentially.
Is this Chris Curry?
Chris Curry, yes.
Yeah. Was that to do with Sinclair or?
That was Science of Cambridge.
Yeah.
Chris was in the process of levering himself away from Clive, but hadn't split off entirely.
Science of Cambridge is Sinclair, is that right?
Yes. Science of Cambridge is one of the Sinclair radionics companies.
Right. Okay. So you showed him.
So I showed him my version of that, and Herman got very interested in the design, asking questions like, "Will it work?" Of course it will. And so during this summer where I was negotiating with the senior tutor, I also built the prototype for that, the Acorn System 1 prototype.
This is before you start the computer course.
Yeah.
So when he came to the computer course, I thought he found you on the computer course, and then it happened before that.
No, it was before that.
Oh, right.
It was in the summer before I did the computer course.
But how did he find you then?
As I said, through the Cambridge University Microprocessor Society.
Yeah, okay. So you were beginning to work for Acorn.
So while I was doing the 1-year computer science course, I was also helping bootstrap Acorn into existence, which may account for the 2-2, since a lot of time was spent at Acorn.
How far did he use your design? He saw your design and then he said, "What? Can I use it?" Or did you?
No, he said the conversation was along the lines of, "Here's the design for the display part of your electronic pocketbook. Will that work?" "Yes, of course it will. It's like this design that I've done before." "What's that?" that's my version of the MK14. Will that work? Oh yes.
And then he says,
and then it says, can you build it? So he paid for me to stay in some extremely grotty room round near the fire station, well, where it used to be, and build that. And of course it did work.
And it was a foundation of Acorn, later Acorn?
Yes, I mean CPU Limited was the foundation that became Acorn, but that became Acorn's first Acorn machine, the Acorn System 1. Acorn was a trading name for CPU Limited in the consumer space.
So this was, you designed Acorn 1?
Yes. 2, 3, 4.
Really? Gosh. This needs to be marked as we pass it by.
I mean, if I'd known you were interested in that, I would have brought the prototype machine.
Well,
I have it at home.
Good. Can I photograph it later?
I can send you images.
That would be wonderful to put in. So that summer, was it that summer that, well, during the course you built the Acorn 1?
No, it was during that summer.
Yeah.
And during the course, we built much more stuff. The Christmas term and going home for Christmas, I wrote the first basic interpreter. I think that running into Christmas, I must have written the assembler, disassembler, editor facilities.
What was it called?
What was what called?
Well, both those programs, were they called Acorn Basic or something? Or?
Well, initially I called it Basil, BASIL. But yes, it became Acorn Basic, Acorn System Basic. The assembler, disassembler, editor was called UAID, ADE, assembler, disassembler, editor with the U stuck in the front of it.
So that was all going on alongside the course?
Yeah.
And you passed the course too?
Just 2-2. Drinking degree, if you remember.
Did anything else happen during that year, or should we move on to the...
Well, by before I even did the exams, I had a job offer from Herman. Herman came along to the graduation ceremony. So I've never done a job interview in my life.
Lucky for some. And he offered you a job with Acorn?
Yeah, he took my parents out to the tea rooms at Grantchester and they discussed money on the lawn. You won't be surprised to learn that as a start-up it was remarkably impecunious. I was paid £100 a month in the first year, which isn't very much.
No, it isn't.
You can tell it's not very much because my first pay rise, I had my salary doubled, so from £1,200 a year I was earning £2,400 a year. That's never happened again, but...
How soon was that?
That was after a year.
After a year, gosh.
Yes. I did live for a year on £100 a month. Not an easy thing. But yes, after getting to 2,400, the next step was 3,600 and then 4,800. So my
not exponential.
Not exponential at all. My pay rise was slowed down. But yes, you look back and you can scarcely believe how on earth you could possibly live on £100 a year. And basically, and source, you didn't own very much, you didn't do very much, and did bring to an end habits of buying books and things because I didn't have enough money.
Where were you living?
I got a room with Paul Bond, the supervisor, and gradually, obviously, inveigled him into Acorn's mysterious world. By the time we got the BBC contract, Paul would be employed by Acorn to write the operating system. I designed it, but he and John Thackeray actually wrote it.
You mentioned Herman as finding you, and you worked with him for many years. I've interviewed Herman, and he's an honorary fellow of King's. Tell me something about Herman.
Herman is congenitally unorganised and late. That's why he wanted an electronic pocketbook. When you're travelling with Herman, it's the most unpleasant feeling in the world. You are on the airplane, you are sitting next to an empty seat, and the pilot is announcing to everybody, "We're sorry, we're just waiting for one less passenger. The empty seat is next to you."
But inspiring.
Herman always says he gave us two things that Intel, Motorola, etc. didn't give their microprocessor designers. He gave us no money and no resources, and hence we built something that became successful. Herman's a hands-on involved person. He likes to understand what is going on. So at all the really key moments, he's actually been quite highly involved. And if you think of Acorn, when it got the BBC micro contract, it was already quite a decently sized company. There's a lot of stuff going on in such a company. Herman, as a company founder, had some weaknesses. He spent the first year going and doing accountancy courses in the evenings, just to learn enough to run the books. Even so, he found the time to be massively involved in everything and all the technical stuff. So, like the Acorn System 1, he had to have the whole circuit diagram explained to him, and was involved in all the steps going forwards. In designing the BBC Micro, he was involved in the decisions, calling us all into his office to hold our discussions, including the key ones where it became a dual processor machine. For designing the ARM, Steve and I and Herman used to walk down from Acorn.
Further.
Yeah. We used to walk from Acorn to the local pub, discussing where we were with Herman every lunchtime, and walk back again. So he managed to be hands-on even for that. And even though Steve and I didn't know what we were doing, and it was probably obvious that we didn't know what we were doing. I mean, after all, Herman had worked with us all our careers. We recruited both Steve and I out of university, Steve having stayed to do a PhD first. So Herman knew that we'd never designed a microprocessor, but was prepared to believe in us that we could, even though we didn't know we could. And of course, for building the BBC microcomputer, he firmly believed we could do it when we knew we couldn't, and it was his belief that ran out.
Well, let's go to that story, which is very famous and features in the Macfarlane and other BBC sagas. If you say the firm was already quite big, and then there was a call for a new computer for the BBC, but you tell the story.
Well, there wasn't a call for it. Chris Curry had got wind from some of his contacts in London that the BBC wanted such a thing, and had been employing for over a year various companies, one called New Brain, which was part of, I think, Husky at the time, to build a computer. And they hadn't been getting anywhere. So Chris convinced them to come up and see the prototype of Acorn's next computer. So at the time, Acorn had the system range and the Atom being another Chris Curry invention. So we got all the way up to System 4s, I think. I'm not sure we'd built System 5. Systems were range machines with lots of individual cards in them, cards in a rack. So the overall system launchers were quite rare. It was just there were a lot of cards, and you could build a double-decker rack of Eurocards with a lot of functionality in them, and we had a lot of software and so on. So we'd been discussing ever since the Atom was moderately successful, which Chris Curry and Nick Toop had built in a back room, and we'd supplied lots of software to it grudgingly because we didn't think it was a very well designed machine. So we'd been discussing what a successor computer should be, and we discussed it like forever. Nobody really knew what they wanted. Chris Curry wanted another home computer like an Atom. Andy Hopper, newly a director of Acorn, wanted a scientific computer. Herman wanted a business computer. I just wanted everybody to agree. So I came up with this idea that we'd design a computer that was a dual processor machine, and so it could be made in parts and would be operable in parts. And the part that everybody calls the BBC microcomputer is actually the I/O processor of the multiprocessor machine. And so the concept is you design that bit, and then you add. Originally it was going to be the National Semiconductor 16032, renamed to 32016, and that would be a scientific computer, or you'd add originally an 8286, and that would be a business computer for Herman.
So you managed to get them.
So that gave some semblance of agreement as to what we would do, but there was nothing. We had nothing, and this was the nothing that Chris Curry had invited the BBC up to see. So with little more than a concept in our heads, and obviously the knowledge of having designed all the system range of boards, so we'd built video controller boards, memory boards, disk controllers, all sorts of boards being built for the system range.
And he said, it's ready, come and see it next week.
Yes, come and see it on Friday. Steve and I hadn't been involved in any of that. We had jobs to do and so on. So Herman rang us each up on the Sunday evening before the Friday to let us know that this was what was going to happen. And Herman's line was, "Hello. Hello, Herman." Bit of pleasantry, bit of chat, with me thinking, what does he want? Why is he ringing me up late on a Sunday evening? And so the conversation goes, we've got the BBC coming up on Friday to see the Proton prototype. We had a code name for it. And I said, what prototype? There isn't one, that's impossible. And Herman said, well, no, but we'll have built one by then. No, that's impossible. And then Herman's masterstroke, well, Steve thinks that it's possible. Will you give it a go? And so I said, well, I think it's completely impossible, but if Steve thinks it's possible, I'll give it a go. And obviously he'd said exactly the same thing to Steve. Right? There was no hiding the deception, because when we arrived at work on Monday morning, it was immediately obvious what had happened. But anyway, we would give it a go. So we had to get our ideas together pronto, design the I/O processor part, and so we got our ideas down and had a circuit diagram by Wednesday. In parallel, we got all the parts ordered. Now that was quite hard because we had quite advanced ideas. You know, we wanted to move on from what we'd done before. So we needed a 6502 twice as fast as the existing ones. We needed a memory system 4 times as fast as the existing ones. In the system range you had both a static memory board and a dynamic memory board. We wanted to build a dynamic memory system 4 times faster. Steve had been reading the books and seen something that was just launched. So we ended up with the Hitachi Rep bring in by hand the first 4K by 16 dynamic RAMs of the speed grade we needed that were in Europe. and that's quite sobering. We tried our best not to break them. To make it, well, there wasn't time to get a printed circuit board made. Our traditional way of building prototypes was this prototyping solution called VeriWire. In VeriWire you have small Eurocards and you wrap bits of wire around and solder them, which melts the insulation of the wire. It's not very reliable and it's not very quick, and so Herman consulted with Andy and they brought in the fastest gun in the West, Ramanoush Banerjee from the computer lab, who was a wire wrap gun expert, and we determined to wire wrap the prototype. And so that started. I don't know if it actually started on Wednesday, but anyway, it took till early Thursday evening for the wire wrap to be built.
After the wizard from the computer lab had come and wrapped up your...
Well, RAM helped. I mean, we all had to be there, as it were. It wasn't like we took a day off. It was quite intense. So Thursday early evening we had a prototype. It didn't work, so we plugged it into one of our system range machines with what's called an in-circuit emulator. So that's a special board in the system range out of which comes a big cable that plugs in and pretends to be the microprocessor. So now you have a working computer with a connection to the non-working computer. So you can write programs on the working computer that exercises functions on the non-working one. So gradually through Thursday evening we could find out what was wrong with each bit of it and fix it. And that did take quite a long time because there were quite a lot of mistakes. I mean, if you've seen a picture of a BBC computer insides, there are about 100 chips in there. And the chips have 14, 16, 20, 40 legs. So the number of interconnections is quite high. And so the chance that your wire wrap is a mistake or didn't work properly is quite, there are quite a lot of duff things to find, and it gets increasingly hard for the more obscure bits. So somewhere around 2 AM Friday morning, there was the machine still plugged into the in-circuit emulator from the system range computer, still resolutely refusing to function. And at that stage I said, look, if they're going to come tomorrow and see a working machine, somebody will have to write the software for it. That's going to be me. I better go home now because I'm in no state to write any software. So I went off and I came back at 8 AM having had 4 or 5 hours sleep, which was fairly helpful but not brilliant. So I felt a bit jaded. I found everybody sleeping under the desks in the lab, and woke them, and they said, right, the machine now works, you better get on and write the software. Herman's story is famous as well, which is he became convinced that it was actually the connection to the in-circuit emulator that was causing the prototype not to work, and he convinced Steve Ferber and Chris Turner to disconnect the emulator, put a proper microprocessor in there, and indeed the machine burst into life. Steve always says that's extremely unfair of Herman. More or less a fluke. Anyway, so I had a working computer but with no software on it. So I ported across some of the Acorn operating system. It's called Acorn MOS, MOS. It basically enough to initialize the world, and then I ported in Acorn System Basic in order to provide an easier environment than machine code to write the new stuff that was needed. And by that time the BBC had arrived, but obviously the machine still didn't do anything visible. So I wrote in BBC Basic, typing blind on the keyboard, enough instructions to configure the video controller to display a BBC Machine Mode 0 screen, which was a 640 by 256 black and white display. And having got that correctly programmed and an actual display, again still typing blind, I wrote something that could just display a random warp created graph. Just how high you are, add a random number, which could be negative, and plot the next point. And so by the time they came in, there was a machine there working and displaying the thing. Phew.
And they said, they said to themselves, we know that this has all been botched up in the last 24 hours, but...
They knew that we had nothing. They knew there was nothing and that we'd built it in a week.
Even more impressive.
So yes.
And so they
awarded the BBC microcomputer contract to Acorn.
And Sinclair was furious.
I think a lot of people were somewhat upset. I don't think anybody was furious at the stage of the contract being awarded, because the contract wasn't for very much. See, the contract originally stated that the BBC wanted Acorn to produce 12,000 machines. And particularly in Sinclair's world, where I think he'd already brought out the ZX8, he was working on the ZX81 Spectrum, 12,000 machines isn't a noticeable number at all. For Acorn, it was quite a big thing to have our design, or at least a portion of it, sanctified with a guaranteed set of sales. But it also wasn't a huge number. It was the biggest single number that we'd ever have, but it wasn't huge. The fact that in the first year we'd manufactured 50,000 of the things, we thought that they were being a bit conservative, but we hadn't predicted that, and by end of life there'd been 1 million of them. Those numbers were well in the future and nobody knew. So I think it was only 2 or 3 years later that people started fulminating about Acorn being given the contract. At the time,
wasn't such a big deal.
It wasn't such a big deal.
What happened then? Because I was involved. I was working with the BBC on the BBC Doomsday Disc. I was the advisor on that, and with Peter Armstrong, and we were all very excited by this project. And then suddenly he announced, about a year into the launch, that the whole thing had collapsed or was being undermined because Acorn the BBC Micro had been taken over by Olivetti. So what happened?
Well, the Doomsday machine was considerably later. Yeah. So the BBC Micro itself was built in 81, 82, and the Olivetti takeover was 86. I think Doomsday was 87-ish.
87, yeah.
So what happened in order? Well, obviously BBC Micro quite successful. We started building all the second processors, and they were quite successful too. So by late 82 we'd built most of the equipment that we promised. We had a National Semiconductor 16032 second processor. We had an 8086 one. Torch Computers had built a 68,000 one, because other people could do this stuff. And somebody else had built a 6809 one, and we had an 8286. I think it was an 8286. Might have been a 186 at the time. Powered one as well. So all the leading microprocessors at the time we had either built ourselves or other people had built second processors of the BBC machine. And we could see that the promises for these processors were largely vacuous. So each manufacturer, Intel, Motorola, National Semiconductors, had made big claims about their machines, saying how wonderful they were, capable of supporting high-level language concepts and giving efficient work. What we found was that it wasn't true. That to a first approximation, a 6502, a 68000, an 8286, an NS16032 all ran at the same speed when you normalised, well, not even normalised. When you looked at things, a 4 MHz 6502, an 8 MHz 16032, an 8 MHz 68000, and I think you could only get to a 6 MHz on the 8286 at the time. They all ran at much the same speed, no matter the massive differences in their architectures. And we theorised that the reason for this was the memory systems. We could design far better memory systems, but on a 8 MHz 68000, for example, it took 4 clock ticks to run a single bus cycle, and you got 2 bytes back. So it had 4 megabytes per second bus bandwidth. And the 4 MHz 6502, it ran a clock cycle it ran a bus access in 1 clock cycle and ran at 4 MHz and took 1 byte back. So it also had 4 megabytes. And when you looked at it through that prism, all these machines, none of which had caches on them, of course, they all ran at the same speed because their bus speed was low. We could build memory systems with much higher bandwidth easily. We did all the time, but we couldn't find a microprocessor to use them, and we went all over the world looking for them. So at that stage it was an annoyance. We could build a high performance memory bandwidth memory system. At the time we thought we could only build a 16 megabyte one, but later on we thought of an additional wrinkle that would push it much faster. But where was the processor that could use that? There wasn't one. And that was it for a while. We just remained unsatisfied. So 2 things happened. Andy Hopper put on my desk the very first publications of IBM, Stanford and Berkeley's RISC work.
What does RISC mean?
It meant Reduced Instruction Set Computer. That's a bad acronym, and what it should have said was Reduced Instruction Set Complexity. It was a way of designing a processor that was very different. And it was all very interesting, but we'd been out to visit people's microprocessor labs. There'd be huge buildings stacked full of engineers all doing stuff, and we could see that it was hard because National Semiconductors, I think it was revision E of the 16032 to be renamed 32016 before it even functioned, revision H before it didn't have any bugs that were very obvious, and something like revision K before it was actually shippable because it had lots of bugs and interrupts and so on that they hadn't fixed. So it seemed to be something that employed a lot of engineers and was very difficult to get right. So we didn't really think of designing our own at that stage. Then we went to visit Western Design Centre because they had a new microprocessor, so we wanted to know more about it, and there was no internet, so beyond what was printed in the papers, the only way you could find out more was going there. And Western Design Centre are important because they're the people who designed the 6502 originally, although it's manufactured by lots of other people, Rockwell, Cinetech, MOS Technology. The 6502 was designed at Western Design Centre, and they were designing a new thing. It would be called the 65SC816 eventually, and Acorn would go on to use it in the Acorn communicator. so we flew out to Phoenix to find out about it, and we were expecting Western Design Centre would be like all the other places we'd visited, big buildings full of engineers. What we actually found in some back alleys down an unfashionable side of Phoenix were some bungalows staffed by some senior engineers and a bunch of school graduates, and they were designing a microprocessor, and we weren't that impressed with the 65SC816. It didn't seem to reach forward very much, though, as I say, we would go on to use it. It was better than the 6502. But our overwhelming impression as we left there was, and I can't remember whether it was Steve or I who said it, hell, if these guys can design a microprocessor, maybe we can. So it sort of switched a little switch in our brain from we can't design one of those things to perhaps we can design one of those things. So then you get to play fantasy instruction set design for a long time, and get increasingly convinced that we do understand what we're talking about.
Okay, so you came back with confidence that you could design one.
Yes, so that would have been late 82, I guess. So
is that when you started to make risk software?
Well, with the hat on that said perhaps we can design our own stuff, I reread all the risk papers and began to appreciate that maybe here was a methodology that was amenable to a small team. And I think particularly it might have been Risk 1. Berkeley Risk 1 was designed by quite a small team. The Stanford MIPS was designed by more, and obviously the IBM 801 was a big building full with lots of engineers. So we began to convince that if we were going to do anything, then it had to look more or less like these ideas, this new way of designing a microprocessor. But mostly it's plain fantasy instruction set games. So the conversation between me designing the architecture and Steve designing the microarchitecture is basically resolving what instructions is it advantageous to have. If there was an instruction I wanted that he couldn't work out how to implement, we wouldn't have it. If he knew how to implement something that I thought was very interesting, maybe we could stretch the design of the instructions to include that sort of capability. And there were lots of things in Berkeley Risk 1, Stanford MIPS in particular, that we couldn't work out how to design. And so we didn't have that. And at the same time, there were lots of things we could work out how to design and they looked very advantageous. We had a very different way of thinking about how computer instruction sets were used than the other teams. Particularly Stanford, they were basically designing, Berkeley as well actually, they were designing computers to match the compilers they had. We didn't have a compiler, so that wasn't a goal for us. But Berkeley Risk 1 and all the Berkeley Risk machines after it, which led on into Spark, they were all designed around close examination of the portable C compiler, and that led them to make particular design decisions. Stanford made similar decisions based on better compilers. We had no compilers. We later discovered that we'd built a machine that was compiler agnostic. It suited different types of language, different types of compiler quite well. You could write interpreters. Both Prolog and Lisp compilers were written for it, as well as conventional BCPLC type compilers, and it suited them all, which was good.
What is the advantage of, why is Risk How is an approach so important?
So all these people, Intel, National, Motorola, have been trying to build machines that executed high-level languages better. So when the BBC microcomputer was built, the number of transistors you could use to manufacture a microprocessor was quite low, and so the microprocessor couldn't do very much, and that basically meant that you programmed it at its best in assembly language. And on the BBC microcomputer you got heroes doing amazing things with assembly language. David Braben and Ian Bell writing Elite. So you had a 1 megahertz 6502 processor with a fairly restricted amounts of memory, and they were able to cram a galactic space trading game with 3D wireframe graphics with hidden line removal into that. So one of the interesting things we did quite early on, as Herman formed us into Project A. Project B was to design the successor to the BBC machine, but Project A was to build the Acorn RISC machine, ARM, was to come up with some slogans to keep us honest. And so our slogans, we had a slogan called MIPS for the Masses, which was to keep us focused on the mass market. We weren't building a scientific processor that would have a low number of users. We were building something that would... Herman wanted us to have a MIPS per dollar rating that was good. Cheap processor, lots of millions of instructions per second. So MIPS for masses. We also had a belief that we wanted everybody to be able to achieve results that was good as writing Elite, but to do that from a high level language. And that of course means we needed big numbers of MIPS, because high level languages are quite wasteful in machine performance. So those slogans did keep us to a different line, kept us focused on building things. The low power bit, well, we didn't have access to any tools that would reliably predict power. We wanted to put the processor into a plastic package, so Steve became very leery of anything that would use power up, and all that engineering to avoid using power resulted in it being very low power.
And that's a huge advantage in small devices now, the low power.
Yes, we simply wanted it because we wanted to build a computer that didn't have expensive heat sinks and power supplies. One of the lessons from building the BBC Micro was the places where there were heat sinks, like the video processor, were hot and reliable, and the power supply is a hot and unreliable bit. So if you can reduce the loads on those systems, you have a better machine, a quieter machine. So we wanted it to be cheap, which meant a plastic package, and we didn't want to build an expensive power supply and so on. So that, and we wanted it in small packages. We wanted to build home computers with it. So that precluded exotic solutions and expensive solutions.
How did this then evolve into ARM?
It was ARM.
It was already called ARM, was it?
Yes, Acorn RISC Machine.
Ah.
ARM, that's what ARM originally stood for.
Really?
When ARM was floated off as a separate company in 1990, they had to elide the word Acorn, so for a while it stood for Advanced RISC Machine. But eventually Robin Sachs really decided it should just stand for ARM. ARM should just mean ARM, and that's what it...
It's not automated or anything. Yeah. So from the beginning it was Acorn RISC Machine. From what date?
Certainly by the beginning of Project A, which would be something like April 1983.
Gosh, very early.
Very early. I mean, back to the slogans. You can think about things better when they've got names, you can discuss them more easily.
Yes.
So it's always been very important, particularly to me, to have a name for something. The name of the beast.
What is your present company called?
I work for a company called Broadcom.
Broadcom. You work for them?
Yes.
Well, just one or two more questions, if I may. One is, how do you work? I mean, what do you think is... We talked a little bit about walking and sleeping, but when you're thinking about difficult problems, can you explain a little more about how you go about solving design or other problems?
The obvious thing is nothing complex is built by a single person, and nothing complex is built quickly. I always like to think of it, you go into a gallery and you look at this enormous painting on the wall and think, how could Titian or whoever have painted that? It must be stupendous. And A, it took a long time, and B, he had a lot of helpers. So A, things take a long time to solve, and B, there are a lot of engineers actually working on it. So for ARM, although as is well known, I did the architecture and Steve did the microarchitecture, I also led a team of people to verify correctness of the machine, verification and validation being immensely important. So me, Hugo Tyson, David Seal, John Thackeray wrote programs in ARM machine language to demonstrate the thing was an ARM. And of course we had to build the thing. So Steve had the microarchitecture, but a team of engineers led by Robert Heaton, Jamie Urquhart, Dave Howard were also there. And then we had to also write models of it. So I wrote a model in 6502 machine code and another one in 16032 machine code. Steve wrote a model of it in BBC Basic, a cycle accurate version of what the logic was going to do. We verified all those models did the same thing. Then the software models were used to verify the verification programs and to begin porting compilers. So Lee Smith led a team of people, Harry Oldham, can't remember other people, Richard Cowney, to write programming tools for it. David Seal, John Thackeray started doing silly things like porting Lisp and the adventure language that they had written a large adventure game called Ackerton in. Meanwhile, everybody forgets we were also building a computer. We weren't just building a microprocessor. So ARM was backed up by having an I/O controller, a video controller, and a memory controller. The I/O controller was run by Mike Muller, the video controller by Tudor Brown, the memory controller by Alistair Thomas, with more engineers. I mean, each participated in each of the other projects. Steve and I getting involved in both of them. So we actually built 4 chips. ARM came back first because we'd started it first. But all 4 chips came back and we had a 4-chip computer prototype later in 1985. So that's how it actually gets done. Big number of people. That was most of the research and development department of Acorn at the time, all designing this stuff.
Well, I've got 2 more questions. One is, I asked you a little bit about Herman. The other person who you mentioned early on as becoming chairman was Andy Hopper. Tell me something about Andy, because I've interviewed him as well.
So Andy became, I assume, non-executive director of Acorn fairly early on, and was quite influential in pushing particular technologies, particularly towards scientific computing. He was, in his own research life, he did the Cambridge Ring and the Cambridge Fast Ring, He was therefore quite influential when we built our own networks for Acorn Econet. He was also indirectly very influential because to exploit the Cambridge ring designs, he started up a company called Orbis, and that had people like Mike Muller in it, and over time Orbis was fused with Acorn, and so Mike Muller is ARM's CTO today. So Andy's been quite influential in bringing the world of technology advances from outside into Acorn. Acorn was basically a place which grew things by itself. Not invented here, but more a plethora of things are invented here. We don't have time for other things.
And the last question is, may not be relevant, but if you were advising a young person going to university or at university about a career in computer science and computing and so on, maybe you would dissuade them, but what would you say? Have you got any advice from your experience?
Engineers get moderately well paid, which is good, and they have a very interesting life because engineering is about creating stuff, pretty much. Even if it's recreating stuff because you're fixing somebody else's bugs, it's still about creating things. So it suits creative individuals. The stereotypical engineer as portrayed on TV doesn't talk to anybody. Engineering's all about communication. You have to talk to people, you have to collaborate in groups. Engineering does not suit isolated, reclusive individuals unless they're totally and utterly brilliant, because engineering is a team sport.
That's a very nice way to end. So thank you so much, Sophie.